This Choircast podcast is brought to you by the Quantum Gospel of Mary and the Lost Gospel of Truth by Keith Giles. For nearly 2,000 years, Mary Magdalene has endured attempts to erase her from the Gospel of John, suppression of her gospel text, and even false allegations by the 6th century Pope of being a prostitute. In this new book, author Keith Giles reveals the truth about Mary's gospel message and restores her prominence as the apostle to the apostles. Available now on Amazon.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney and Bethany Shea.
Hello. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Nat Turney, and I am here as always with my co-hosts, my brother John. Say hi, John.
Hi, John.
And the ever lovely and loquacious Bethany Shea. Say what's up, Bethany.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
It's going good. I still have yet to come up with another word besides lovely and loquacious.
It's working. It's working.
If I keep talking, it'll become litigious. The lovely, the loquacious, the litigious. Wow.
You have to get a thesaurus in here.
All sorts of different words. It's like an alliterative. Do they make those? Anyway, this is the podcast, by the way, and we're glad that you're back for another episode of This Is Not Church. As always, we have an awesome guest, so I won't delay with any more of my yammering, but introduce you, or should I say reintroduce you to Kevin Sweeney, who we've had on the podcast before. It's been, at least a year or two.
It's been at least two.
Yeah, it's hard to believe we've been doing this long. For the 7 people still listening, thank you. We appreciate that you still tune in. But we're gonna talk again to Kevin Sweeney, who was the co-founder and lead pastor of Imagine Church, an urban church in Honolulu that was welcoming of all people, who sees imagination as the key of the future, chooses authenticity over performance, substance over hype, and quality over quantity. He's the host of the podcast, The Church Needs Therapy. Amen to that. And is the author of the books, The Making of a Mystic, My Journey with Mushrooms, My Life as a Pastor, and Why It's Okay for Everyone to Relax. Also, The Joy of Letting Go, and his latest book, The Cosmic Christ and the Concrete Jesus, all with Quoir Publishing. He lives in Honolulu, poor baby, suffering for Jesus in Honolulu with his wife and the co-founder of Imagine Christine and their 2 kids, True and Mikayla. Welcome back to the podcast. Kevin, how are you, sir?
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. That was good. You got a great voice, dude. I don't know if I told you that last time. You got a good voice to do this.
I've said for years I have a face that's made for radio.
You have a voice of like what you think of like those old-fashioned silver microphones and black and white TV, and they're like, well, in the Vietnam War, guess what just happened this week? It kind of has that type of you and Walter Cronkite. I'm good, man. I'm happy to be here. You know, you can see out the window a rare kind of gray and cloudy day here. It's still hot though. And yes, I still, in all seriousness, don't take these spaces for granted. I'm super grateful when people take the time. I know what goes into the back end. So I'm happy to be here with you 3 to talk about this, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we appreciate it. I remember the first time you were on, we talked quite a bit about your journey with psychedelics. And that was, to be honest, I think it might have been the first serious conversation that I'd had with somebody about the benefits, the possible benefits of psychedelics. And I live in Texas right now, by the way, and I did then too. But the right now part is right now Texas is going full bore the other way. We've decided, while the rest of the country is seriously considering at least loosening, if not legalizing, certain substances like mushrooms and THC, Texas is going to go like no to all of it. In 5 years, we'll be talking about prohibition in Texas. What do you want to bet? We're like, you know what? Alcohol is off the table too. What is the, and not that we need to talk about psychedelics a bunch. You have a new book we definitely want to talk about, but is that a phenomenon you run into in Hawaii where I know it's a pretty conservative religiously, is it conservative politically as well?
Well, I mean, Hawaii is always a blue state, know, so it's interesting. The Christian enclaves, which are, always kind of going back with the unique form of colonialism and, imperialism that's been present here, illegal annexation in, 1893. So Hawaii's very complex place culturally. And, the Christian spaces are very conservative, but as a whole, it's a very different experience.
Gotcha.
I mean, weed, or in what people in Hawaii call like pakalolo, has been very present for, a long time. It's not legal here. I don't even think it's decriminalized here. So you don't have like a California dispensary type of situation. My family's in California. So, but it's also very much a part of the culture, at least. And, psychedelics and mushrooms as well, not in a public sphere in the sense of where it's, on the ballot to be legalized or decriminalized. But I think in the broader cultural realm, it's definitely a part of things.
Yeah. Well, one thing I thought that was really interesting about the conversation that we had about it in particular was that, and yours is one of now several stories I've heard of people who dealt with things with a very measured approach to substances like psilocybin, other things where the fear is always that people are going to jump off into drug addiction, and that's not what they do. I mean, they microdose. I had a friend who did this under the care of a doctor for a couple years and dealt with very severe PTSD, traumatic brain injury, those kinds of things after his military service. And I don't know. To me, it seems like a tool in the tool belt that I don't know why we keep wanting to ignore the medicinal possibilities for some of these substances. But meanwhile, well, actually, okay, I do know it's the pharmaceutical. And there's got to be a part of it that's, pharmacies can't make a ton of money off of addicting people to painkillers. But I did want to just remind people that was for you, if I remember correctly, then a bridge to a sort of broader spiritual awakening. Is that a fair way to say that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the very, very zoomed out short story is like, wasn't really connected with church growing up, was very successful in sports and music when I was young, and had a lot of, in the sense of like kind of like money and drugs and, all those things. I was like the stereotype for like a 1970s style Billy Graham preacher. It's like, you got everything, but you feel nothing on the inside. I'm like, damn it, you're right. And so, yeah, without youth groups, without guides, without any awareness of youth or anything like that when I was a kid, mushrooms very much were, I have a chapter in that book called Mushrooms as Missionaries.
Yeah.
And I say, in the greatest sense of the term missionary, of someone pointing someone towards Christ without all the colonial expansion, violent domination, it's a whole different conversation. I'm like, in that sense, mushrooms were a missionary pointing me beyond themselves towards the possibility of life and fullness and the Christ, so that was my experience. I definitely wasn't microdosing when I was 16, 17, and 18, we were doing a whole different type of thing at that time. But eventually when I had this profound, spontaneous awakening moment with God while I was 18, it was while I was on a pretty large dose of mushrooms. And once I had that profound awakening moment, I never, ever did psychedelics or hard drugs again. Because for me, they were always the finger pointing me beyond themselves towards that which is, towards the possibility of God, towards truth. And to me, I tell people, like, once you have directions to the ocean, to go back and get directions would be to be going backwards.
Right, for sure.
And so for me, the psychedelics were the directions pointing me to the ocean of life, of God, etc. And once I was there, although you're tempted to go back just because people like to get high and people like to feel that feeling, to me, the real work was, how do I now live my life in the ocean, become the ocean, and make this everything to me? So yeah, they were, even pastoring, we're talking about pastoring Bethany like for 10 years. I've always been relatively ambivalent towards the psychedelic revolution in whatever stage it's in. I think it's always less than what some people think it is, and much more than what other people are worried that it's, it's not. I think it's something else. But I would never encourage someone to do it, but I really wouldn't discourage people from doing it. I'm like, if they do that, I can probably help, even in my pastoral presence, help people make sense of that and at least be a guide for them along the way. I wasn't preaching people to take it. I also wasn't telling them not to. But if they stumbled upon that in their own journey, we can probably have some good conversations because of my own experience. That's how I would pretty much handle it pastorally at the time.
I have a friend who says that when, like, taking mushrooms is like opening up God's sock drawer and rifling through it. It's like being able to see what's hidden in the back spaces of God's sock drawer. I'm curious, like, how did you get to that place of being open to using psilocybins and different things?
Well, this was a very different point in my life. I'm 40 right now. So I was probably the first time I did mushrooms, I think I was 16 or 17. So at that point in my life, it wasn't like, you know what? I think psilocybin is a tool in my tool belt on a spiritual journey towards the possibility of awakening. It was like, nah, we're young and we do drugs. And it wasn't the first drug I did. It was like, if things come around, we're doing hard drugs. And so mushrooms was a part of it. When you're in that world, it's like, you might try coke. You might, I don't know if things get bleeped here, but you're doing drugs that are around. It's like, well, psychedelics is a part of that. But for me, I realized quickly what for my friends was a temporary, just experience. They're tripping out. For me, I'm like, it is that, but it's also more. None of my friends went on the journey I went on after. They were just like, hey, let's get high. We're treating this like any other drug. So I think I was just at a point in my life where I was just doing drugs. And then this one came along and I was like, there's something else happening here. And I'm going to be open and keep following this, where it takes me. So, yeah.
Wow. So you saw it as like an invitation into something deeper and more realistic or authentic?
Increasingly as I did it. Yes.
Okay.
That's what I like. For me, it was like, I really sensed in the mushrooms, they were saying to me like, yes, but keep going. Yes means like, there's something here. You're seeing something. The sock drawer. I'm sensing something real. I'm experiencing. It was the only time I ever felt that peace. I had a real inner restlessness growing up and I was like, man, it shows me the mind is capable of experiencing peace, but the peace that I long for cannot be contingent upon the ingesting this because this is temporary. It shows me I have it, but I'm looking for something that's actually sustainable after. And it's here is opening me up to it, but it's something else out there that's going to lead me further. And I started to feel that and sense that more and more as I did it, through my junior, seniors, whatever years of high school, so. Yeah, it was really amazing, to be honest.
But that makes a lot of sense because I don't have a ton of experience with any of this, but I would intuit. So this is just me guessing, but that would be sort of maybe the baseline issue with substance abuse is, well, I found something that gives me peace. I'm going to keep going back there. Exactly. And I'm going to keep going. And then not being able to replicate that experience for very long before other physiological things happen to you and you just no longer, and then you just get frustrated. So treat it as a doorway to something else. Go ahead, sir.
Exactly. No. And my experience can sound very like romanticized, and what happened to me. But like my best friends growing up and the people closest to me were like ended up on Skid Row, ended up locked up. Like we were all on this trajectory, of life. And I was there with them. I happened to go a different path. But if you would have seen us at 16, we were all doing the same thing.
Right, right.
For me, it just started to take on a different life of its own. And what you said about addiction, when I had this awakening moment at 18 and I knew what happened, I said, I just experienced God. And I know that. And no one needs to affirm that. That's why even I get to in the book, like from the very beginning, my faith was an embodied direct experience of divine affirmation. That's always been my foundation. The beliefs came after. The concepts came after. That always shaped how I thought about things. That's why people were like, the cross, it's a bridge to here and here. I was like, dude, I'm just here.
Yeah.
And I never even heard of the cross. So what does that mean? And even when I had that awakening moment, sure, like everybody else, like a month or two goes by and you're like, I kind of want to do mushrooms again, which for me is like the equivalent of like, let's go to another Christian event and, worship as hard as we can and cry and maybe we'll finally be okay, And to me, I'm like, the issue is not returning to the peak experience and returning to the mountaintop. The issue is taking that which trust and experience on the mountaintop and integrating that into your everyday life on the path. It's just easier to get high again. It's easier to for another conference, and just like think if I just worship and flex my body hard enough, like we'll be free, and it doesn't work, No. The issue is like taking that which you've seen and actually becoming that. It's not just a belief, it's who you become. That's the whole spiritual journey. Because after I had that awakening moment, a part of me is like, man, I kind of want to eat mushrooms again. I love them. I've been doing them. But to me, and this is weird. You think about conviction, and the spirit and how we talk about those things. I was 18 without church. People tell me, and I said, to go back and do mushrooms again is against like my integrity, because to do that would be to betray the very spirit that I experienced that set me free and that these were pointing me towards. Like, what an interesting thing at 18, But I knew it was the easy route going backwards and the journey was ahead without it, So yeah, it was really a phenomenal journey. I thought it was normal. I realized it's not everybody's journey. As it went on.
Well, if you substitute out, if you swap out substance abuse for church experience, you have the model of a lot of the churches I grew up in, which were feeding us those experiences beyond any kind of affirmation that anything that was happening was real. They would just plan these events so that we could continually get sort of rebaptized in these spaces, and all of a sudden get high. We're just getting high all the time. We're being emotionally manipulated by music and by charismatic speakers, and the other experience that I had later in life was what you just said was trying to find some independent affirmation of all of this. Strip away the pet doctrine, strip away the religious experiences, and try to find something that's concrete, which leads us, I guess, my segue to your book, which I like how the cosmic Christ and the concrete Jesus, I like how you juxtapose those two things. So talk about those two seemingly disparate approaches to God, this cosmic Christ and this concrete Jesus. What's up with that? That's my pointed question.
Although I want to honor your segue, I do want to say one more thing about
Please do. Yeah, always.
So, Peter Rollins, I'm assuming, we know Pete. Yeah,
or of him.
So, I do just want to say something about Peter Rollins here. When some people, when it comes, like I grew up pretty much only in hip hop, but whether it's bands or whatever it is, when you're one of those people that's like, I knew them when 20 people were showing up at their shows.
Exactly. Yeah.
I went to what I think was Peter Rollins' first ever tour in the United States of America. It was January of 2009. And it was at a Purple Hollywood Adventist church. It was a Purple Seventh-day Adventist church in Hollywood. He did this event. And it was called Beyond Evangelism. And I had been reading his stuff, whatever before that. But the reason why I bring up Peter Rollins is, one of his concepts he talks about in videos and probably books somewhere is this idea of a crack house church. You ever heard him talk about that? So what you're saying,
yeah.
It's like for a lot of people, the church functions like a crack house,
Yeah, absolutely.
You get high, you're like, cool, I guess I can get through the rest of the week. I return, nothing changes. It's actually reinforcing the status quo that I've accepted. It's given me just enough relief to keep doing the same thing. And he says, and they keep calling us back. They do the same thing. It's like a crack house. Whereas he says the church should be more, this is very Peter Rollins, but he's like, the church should be more like a singer-songwriter, like a poet whose music and whose art, etc., is not having you escape the reality and giving you enough energy to return. It's inviting you deeper into the reality for the sake of transforming the reality so you can move forward, change, So I think he speaks very clearly about how church and God itself can be like a conceptual idol that you get addicted to without any real change.
Yeah, and it falls in line with other things he said about, the idolatry of God.
Exactly.
Where he's talked about even just the objectification of God is idolatry. And that's Western evangelicalism in a nutshell. It's literally making, turning God into something concrete that you can then sit on a shelf and define and then measure other people against and all this other stuff that we do. No, we love Peter. We've been trying to get Peter on the show for a while. I don't know. We'll keep trying. Him and Rob. I saw him and Rob Bell together a few years ago. And first of all, Rob is very tall and Peter is not. Very strange. Sort of like, holy shit, Rob Bell's tall. Holy shit, Peter Rollins is short. And he didn't speak for very long. But no, I like that. I like that idea. And I do also love how Pete pulls in a lot of psychoanalysis which is stuff that as Christians, you and I, John, Bethany probably had the same experience. We were not encouraged to explore. Freud was tantamount to an antichrist, So we didn't learn philosophy. We didn't learn about, psychology and psychoanalysis. We didn't learn about all this stuff until much, much later, when we probably could have used it about 20 years ago. just to get us through the trauma. Yeah, John?
I was just going to say, I remember taking my first philosophy class in college and almost didn't want to let anybody know I was taking
I didn't know any of these people they were talking about.
Yeah, I didn't know.
John enrolled for his first philosophy course, and he got called into the pastor's office.
I see you're noticing with these philosophies of men. Yes. Aristotle's a real prick.
Yeah.
I mean, you gotta watch out for him. But
Kevin, I was just going to say that I think it was about the same time that you were with Peter Rollins that I met him as well, because he did a conference with Rob Bell called Poets, Prophets, and Priests in Grand Rapids. And that was in 2009 as well. And it was just that was the first time I'd ever really had any understanding of philosophy, or that philosophy and Christianity could come together in some sort of dance that it just blew my mind. But yeah, those sorts of spaces where we get to be curious about our faith in a way that, at least as an evangelical, I just didn't understand before. It opened up a whole new doorway. Not quite like psilocybin, but maybe slightly close. Just kidding.
It felt a little like a drug, though, didn't it? It certainly felt illicit.
Either way, you felt a little guilty after it happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
In equally as much trouble for busting out some Plato or some Nietzsche or some, I almost got fired from a job for recommending a Brian McLaren book to a pastor. So,
nice.
Yeah, in the height of the emergent movement.
Oh, it was a generous orthodoxy, which was a mind-blowing, reality-altering book for me. I was like, holy shit! I don't have to be so rigid. There's more space here than I thought. So, we've had a chance to thank Brian for that a couple different times. But no, Peter and it did. When you listen to people like Peter, when you read books like yours, there is sometimes this sudden realization that you've been some things have been withheld from you. You know what I mean? Oh my gosh, I didn't. Why am I in my 50s and I'm just now hearing about some of this stuff? So I appreciate the fact that that this information is getting out and
with that, when people have. Whether people are going through their first, my perspective on what's normally referred to as deconstruction is really just the evolution of one stage of confidence, one stage of faith to another. It's just the first big one for people. Whether it's Fowler's stage 3 to stage 4, spiral dynamics, depending on what map you use. The one that really rattles people is the first time you step outside of yourself and critique and discover the reality that you have a lens you're looking through. Because before, everything just is the way it is. And all of a sudden you look out, you're like, oh, there's a genealogical beginning to these beliefs and these practices. Oh, there's a philosophical blah, blah, blah. It's just jarring. But I always hope for the people, like yourselves and for me and for my friends, for people who are growing, for people who are evolving. I think there's a way to be 100% committed to critique and challenge any beliefs, any religious structures that are getting in the way of life. Absolutely. Without having oppositional energy get in the way of our own freedom. That's a challenge along the way, especially early on. When Roar uses the language, and it comes from Ken Wilber originally, to my understanding, the idea of transcending and including, how do we continue to evolve and transcend, but include the best of these places we came from? And I say that because the withholding part is of course you can feel damn, how has no one ever seen this? Damn, how has my pastor never told me this? How was I, as if there's a conscious conspiracy of silence. When in reality, you have well-intentioned people whose fear and closed-mindedness prevents them from seeing things. So they're not intentionally withholding these. Some of them are blackballing them out of fear, but even that in and of itself comes from a place to try to protect people. It's just filtered through a lot of fear, So to me, I always give people the benefit of the doubt as it's like the controlling mother. She's doing what she does because she loves her kids. It's just her love is filtered through so much fear and so many other of her own unhealed and wounds or whatever, and this could be for a dad and for anybody, that her intentions are right, but the way their practice ends up destroying and doing the opposite of what she wants. So I always just think that, because for the people who are growing and evolving, I'm like, all right, we have the critiques, we have these things, but I still, like, whether it's pastors or the people, want my friends who are growing to still move towards peace and move towards joy and experience the fullness that is beyond the places that have gotten in the way. That's a lot of my energy where it's at.
That early temptation too, especially, I like how you describe that. Deconstruction is like everything else, and it's not unique to deconstruction. Everything gets overused. Everything becomes, 5 years ago we didn't use woke as a pejorative. Now it's just like, but I've always sort of considered it as an evolution. But you're right. That first dismantling.
Yeah, it's true. It's traumatic.
It's the most treacherous. Because I think the temptation to cynicism is probably the strongest there, because there can be a lot of resentment, feeling like you've been bamboozled. I try to see the humanity in those people who maybe have injured me unintentionally. And then sometimes I'm like, yeah, but fuck you guys. You also did stuff intentionally. So I'm not letting you off the hook for all of it. But they're just as injured by the systems that they perpetuate as the people that they foisted upon. They're just more comfortable sometimes, maybe. At least, they're... But anyway, all of that is to say,
yeah.
I like the idea. I do. That's my temptation, because I think I'm prone to cynicism. I think I'm prone to very black and white thinking. And so to try and seek out a place where I'm like, okay, I know you didn't do this to hurt me, but the reality is you did. And the reality is I a lot of my responses to things in life are trauma responses that I'm learning, late in life, that like, oh shit, that's why I do that. Okay. That's not me. It's my knee-jerk reaction to some stimuli. But as we move into experiencing Christ cosmically, as you put it, I just want to talk through that concept, because I think for a lot of people, maybe who have read Richard Rohr's book, Cosmic Christ, would be looking for some similarities there as far as a Christ consciousness kind of thing. I don't know. What's your take on that?
In terms of like, why do I begin with the Cosmic Christ?
Yeah, for sure.
There has to be a relationship with God that transcends and moves beyond what we normally refer to as God. Right? It's the God after God, right? It's that which is, it's this divine presence. People are comfortable using all different kinds of language. And it's the beauty of a God that still has, when Martin Buber talks about an I-thou relationship, where there is still a connection. But it's also bigger than that. There's an I-thou, which is, that second person, it's me and you. There's also, this larger, well, what is, when I say beginning in the very beginning, with the Big Bang through atoms and molecules and cells and simple organisms, right, to human beings and to cultural creation and the formation of communities, etc., how things have evolved, there's been a hidden evolutionary force at work driving the sacred process, where that's also, to me, that's also God. So you need this sort of language that allows for the personal, that allows for the seemingly impersonal engine that is at the heart of the universe to do that, that allows us to be a part of the unfolding. It doesn't negate the I-thou that evangelicals love, like it's just you and I and these types of songs that people sing. I think there's an element of that that's healthy. I think that is a beautiful thing to have that I-thou relationship with God, but it's just more than that. And I think the Christ is language that has been being worked out since Paul and since the early church and the early church fathers up until now, where people are still making sense of, what is the Christ, when the biblical writers speak of that which is embedded within everything and filling the entire universe, existing before all things, holding all things together. Right, like this, the cosmic Christ has been unfolding in, through, and I would argue as this universe from the very beginning. So it is language that people are using to include the best of our limited understandings of God, but also to sort of allow it to happen in a expanding universe with our growing sense of the cosmos and with our place in it. So to me, I'm like, in no way is it limiting God at all. It's actually trying to honor the sacredness of our universe and the sacredness of this driving divine force, and still the loving personal presence of it at the same time. So I think people have been working that out for thousands of years, and I think we still are, figuring out what it means to save the Christ. And I have a lot to say about that, but there's this cosmic yes over everything. I'm like, this is the Christ. There's the fullness of spirit and matter that exists everywhere all around us. This is the Christ. There is a spirit that is perpetually and infinitely giving itself to everybody at all times for those who slow down enough to wake up and touch it and taste it. This is the Christ. It's anything I could say of the Christ, I could say God. There's other ways of saying it that I think take us beyond our normal conceptions of God. So, yeah.
Can you tell me what maybe the differences between the cosmic Christ and the kingdom of God? Is there?
That's a good question. I don't think I've ever thought about that as directly. I think when that language, this metaphor of the kingdom of God, for me, I think about the kingdom of God is the way in which our world is organized in a sacred fashion when God is in charge, if you will. Equality and all these stories of Jesus, the vulnerable are lifted up, the power is taken off thrones, etc. There's no more peace. There's peace. There's no more war, etc. The kingdom of God is that future promise we are all working towards together concretely in our life. So to me, the kingdom of God would be like the result of the Christ, reigning, essentially. The same way we would say God would reign, the NT Wright type of Jesus is king, all that stuff. When God is king, here's what the world looks like. So to me, the Christ is sort of the divine force and the union of holding all things together. And then when I think about the organization of the kingdom, it's like what that looks like when human beings are organizing themselves in and under and through and with and as that, so that would be more concrete, meaning like everyday life stuff, where for me, the Christ is more of this cosmic universal, yes, this divine love, perpetual grace, etc. That is for us, but also is for and with and through everything. Yeah. I've never thought about that though, to be honest.
Yeah. It's like the conceptual becomes pragmatic in some ways. Like it's just an idea. The cosmic Christ is an idea within us unless we're actually putting it into action and reaffirming the yes with our actions. Yeah, it's really beautiful.
Well, that's one of the chapters, the distinctions I make is like between experience and embodiment. So the whole book's broken down in chapters of let's say if it's experience and embodiment. The first half of the chapter is here's what it looks like, feels like, sounds like to directly experience the Christ. And then also embodiment is then what matters after that is the embodying of a Christ-like way of being in this world. So the experience, usually when I talk about Christ as a human being, it's some sort of experiential incoming of Christ, transformative, experiential center that liberates us personally. Okay. But then the embodied part is then our role beyond conceptual beliefs. It isn't really about holding religious beliefs, but it's about embodying a particular way of life following Jesus into this world. So usually the Christ for me as human beings is our direct experience, the knowing, the being known by God, being seen by God, being cared for by God. And then the concrete Jesus is, well, what then does that mean as an embodied form of life in this world? So usually that's how that relationship works. One's more direct experience, and sort of a surrendering to that which is. And then the other one's like, hey, now there's shit to do. There's work to be done in this world. We don't just wait. We don't just stay there and just enjoy it. It's easy for bourgeois kind of Western, consumer capitalists to do. If you have a spirituality that promises you freedom, it's like, cool, let's just do that. And I don't know what, hook up with each other, or try to create a cult or something, It's like, we've seen all those things, No, after that, who are the vulnerable? What does the way of Jesus call us to in an embodied sense? In the kingdom of God, what does it look like to work that out concretely? Yeah.
Yeah. Because if you're not actually living it out, then it's almost like what we were talking about before with just seeking that next dopamine rush, that high that you want to get to feel good about God and life and you, but yet there's like no meat on it. There's nothing that propels you into actually working into those spaces. So that's really good. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you could just spend your time going to revivals and church camp and just keep getting that experience and that high, and then wait for the next one and wait for the next one without any action.
If you really want to get into it, just become an evangelist, and then that's what you do all the time. Is that's one thing that, John, I know you and I talked about a bunch, is as a minister, especially as a music minister, that's a rush. I had to contend with the fact that my ego was wrapped up in most of that. I liked the stage. I liked the accolades. And I was good at it. But there was this constant sort of battle inside myself of like, ooh, I'm doing this. And the truth is, yeah, it was more me doing it than it was God interacting with people. I'm not saying that people didn't experience God in those moments. I'm sure they some of them did. But it was also very manipulative and unintentionally so. I never sat around going, I think if I can get the people to feel this, it'd be great. But what's the mark of a good, music, of a good worship leader is like you can.
How many tears are shed? That's
the like, man, if I get to that third song and we drop to the minor key, baby, the lights come down and the synthesizers come out. I'm like,
I have a chapter in the book called Safe and Dangerous, and I don't have it right now, but essentially what I'm saying is think of this is a paradox. The Christ tells us that we're safe. And I believe we are. I mean, even though we're not. That's a paradox. Like, we're not safe in this world totally, but we are safe in the experiential center of Christ, the deathless presence of Christ, as James Finley calls it from CAC. But I have a chapter where I say, the Christ tells us that we're safe and Jesus calls us to be dangerous. So the Christ tells us we're safe, meaning you're loved, accepted, embraced, welcome just as you are, right? We're not talking about the violence. We're talking about this experiential, radical acceptance of that which is. Okay, we're safe. But if I don't have a liberating, concrete Jesus calling me to be dangerous to a world that is actually not safe for people, that is actually not oriented towards justice and equality, if I don't have this liberating Jesus and this concrete Jesus calling me into an embodied life to work for that, well, then now it's just absolute self-indulgence. It's the Western individual self-indulgent. I'm fine. I'm inoculated from suffering. Maybe I'm in the suburbs and wherever, or maybe I'm in a gated community. I don't have to face it. And that to me, we talked about living in Costa Mesa. It was funny. When I was at Fuller, I went to Fuller for 3 years. And when I was there, I studied Black and womanist theology. That's kind of where my journey with liberation thought began. And I was at Rock Harbor at the time studying Black and womanist theology. It was my first time living in a predominantly white area in my life. And I was in the church. I'm like, man, people here really don't give a shit about the suffering of Black people in the United States of America. They just don't. They don't even think about it. They're not even aware of this history, 400 years, the Atlantic slave trade, how many millions of people were killed, and, sort of Jim Crow and sharecropping and pre and post civil rights. And then what happened to the communities and how ghettos are geopolitical spaces that were created and people are assisted, blah, blah, blah. All right, all this stuff.
Yeah, I didn't know any. I didn't even know any of that. Yeah. Rock Harbor.
And because I'm just like, man, the reality, so many people are catching hell every day and you're just here, and I joke around now. I'm like, if I were to be going as hard as I was back then and really focus on that, if it was 2020 or 2021, I would have got a book deal. But when I was talking about those things in 2010 in Costa Mesa, all I got were ruined friendships with white people and awkward conversations and no longer being invited to dinners. But that is the thing, is that relationship. That's where the concrete, for me, the concrete and liberating Jesus that I inherited from the Black prophetic tradition in the United States of America haunts me. And I have to allow it to continue to haunt me because of my privilege and my place in the United States of America. I don't need that. the same way Black folks do. I don't need a liberating Jesus the same way women do. I don't need a liberating Jesus the same way queer folks do, et cetera, because look at me. I'm a straight white guy, blah, blah, blah. I have all this privilege. I acknowledge that. I need to hear that voice continuously calling me to be dangerous, because I can fall asleep to the suffering of people. I can do that without having it knock on my front door and be like, we're coming for you, in the same way they're going to come for other people. So for me, when I talk about the concrete Jesus, it's the liberating Jesus that you see in the Gospels. That Jesus who always identified with the marginalized, that Jesus who always stood in solidarity with the oppressed, that Jesus who every single story he told was about the people you think are out or in, the people you think are in or out, and the people who you think are in or out, not because God's pushing them out, because the doors they're building to keep people out are actually keeping them out. That Jesus I have to continue to listen to, because I, as a contemplative, as a mystic, as somebody, like, I could just go to the forest and be like, I'm good. My wife's here. I serve. My kids are here. I can honestly just chill. That liberating Jesus has to continue to haunt me in my life in a holy way, to continue to call me into action.
How does that look in your life? Like, how do you actually live intentionally in that? Because you have to, as a white, straight dude, it doesn't come naturally. It's easier just to like sink back into regular life and be in a comfortable state of mind. So what does seeking out the truth of your white privilege, what does that actually look like in your day-to-day life? And then what does it look like to actually work for justice on the ground instead of just in your mind?
Yeah. Well, you are speaking to a very, very strong Enneagram 5, if you're familiar with Enneagram. All right.
Perfect.
So Enneagram 5s in our default patterns want to live up in our heads, gather large amounts of information, aka go to grad school, put together large systems of knowledge, much like the Enneagram, right? We can take 1 million classes and read 1 million things. And for me, Goodwill Hunting is like the proverbial journey for an Enneagram 5. It's one of my favorite movies ever, because Will Hunting, he's like this genius, but he uses knowledge and cynicism as a way to protect himself from the messiness of incarnational life. And his salvation in the end is not reading another book; it's moving to LA to risk being in love with a woman. That's scary. He can't control that in the same way. My journey has always been that as well, moving from information to incarnation, right? And moving into my body. So how I do that concretely, and sometimes you don't even want to say it because, it continues to haunt you. If I'm not embodied flesh and blood connected with vulnerable and marginalized people, I'll lose it. I'll fall asleep, and to a degree. It's not a binary, but I will not be as awake as I can be. If I'm not directly connected with people on the edges, on the margins, people whose lives are not my grad school friends when I'm there, like, let's get a beer and talk shit about the church. It's like, sure, there's a time and a place for that. I love those times. Don't get me wrong. But if I'm not actually connected with suffering, then I won't be moved by it. It'll just be an idea and a thing I talk about. So I would say, in the realest ways, I have to stay actually connected with people who are on the underside of all of this. People, and it's not just people who are oppressed and marginalized. It could just be vulnerable people, because not all vulnerable people have been oppressed. Just like, I work in hospice care. Like, I'm a chaplain for hospice. So people in hospice, it doesn't mean they've been oppressed in a social political sense. It's just the vulnerability of aging and being alone. As an Enneagram 5, if I'm not connected with these spaces, Section 8 housing, this woman alone, and like, damn, this shit is hard, where she's at and in these places, I will not feel other people's suffering in my heart and in my body. I'll just look at it and get more cynical about life. So for me, it's from Kelly Brown, the womanist theologian Kelly Brown Douglas, one of the biggest influences on my understanding of Jesus, from back in the day. She wrote a book called The Black Christ. She wrote a book called What's Faith Got to Do with It? And the two main things that I carried with me personally and pastorally when I was leading Imagine, my wife and I, was her main thing is Jesus's earthly ministry is defined by his identification with the marginalized, his solidarity with the oppressed. So the Jesus that I follow that's how he defines his social kind of life. So when I move into a neighborhood like where I'm at now, especially when I was pastoring a congregation, one of the first questions I ask is, what does it look like for me to be identified with and to stand in solidarity with the oppressed here? Who are they? Am I beginning my personal and social or ecumen or like church ecclesial life moving to those spaces? So for me, before we ever had public gatherings for worship, our church was already in those spaces. I had to begin there. If not, I am betraying this. If this is the point, so for me, there's no substitute for actual concrete presence, because it will just be like a mental exercises, and intellectual exercises that not only won't be good for the world, but it won't be good for me. I'll lose parts of myself when I'm not connected. And I felt that at different times in my life, to be honest. So there's no other practice that will do that for me. Nothing else even close to it.
So that practice of getting into relationship and being connected to people that are on the margin or being oppressed, that actually keeps you embodied to yourself instead of stuck in your head.
Absolutely. Totally.
So it's like taking what you were saying is the cosmic Christ and then making it into the concrete Christ in some ways, that sense of like, and it was cheesy, but like, what would Jesus do? But like moving into those sorts of spaces, does that fill you up? Like, do you feel pretty like fulfilled in that work, or do you feel depleted, or what is it that you do to make sure that you're healthy for yourself, spiritually and physically and emotionally healthy, mentally healthy?
I think one, being concretely connected with vulnerable people makes me feel more human. Because if not, I will retreat to my mind. And I know I'm prone towards cynicism too, Nat. I just have that thing in me. Like, I'm not an anger person. I'm not a rage person. I'm a cynical, like, let's all stand on the edge and just talk shit about people. Like, that's my comfort zone, and I know, like on Instagram, like I've heard this, he's actually like a rapper from Koreatown, but he talked about on this podcast, like invisible wars. And he's like, in our heads on Instagram, we all have like invisible wars with people, like people who just piss you off, people who are like, are you fucking serious? Like when they say stuff, and just people who bother you. That's a lot of shadow work, by the way, we won't get into when all that's happening. That's what's going on. It's all projection. But when if I'm on Instagram or somewhere else and I see let's say a group, because this is really actually real to me, right? Over the years, there's like groups and, being in Costa Mesa, you can imagine this, there's a group of 5 to 7 white guy pastors, and they're still evangelical, they're slightly forward, but still within their evangelical framework, much like, what the church we were talking about kind of occupies that space. And if I see them we're doing a retreat together and we're buds and we're men, we're all friends, my first reaction is shut the fuck up. And because deep down, I want that. I want that sense of community. I want that. I'm not into the white brotherhood thing, but the sense of fellowship and connection. And I felt very alone pastoring the way I have. Many people do. But I also know that thing in me that says what I say when I see those things, when my cynicism reacts quicker and louder and stronger within, I know I'm feeling disconnected. I know I'm not feeling in my embodied life as connected as I want to be, because I'm the less connected I am, the more cynical I get. I just know that about myself. So I'm how many times in the Gospels is Jesus telling stories basically being your salvation is always in the other? Always. Oh, the Roman centurion, Peter and them go there, get up, kill and eat. It's those who I thought were my enemies are actually leading me towards a broader expression of God and of who I am. That happens all the time because we need others to help us discover the truth of who we are. And so that's my biggest thing is I need other people to help me truly feel fully human, and or else I'll just get cynical when I'm disconnected. And the burnout, to be honest, I've never been... One thing I'm proud of, it's a weird thing to be proud of as a pastor, but I never burnt out in almost 10 years of ministry, of leading a church. I never teetered on the edge of burnout. I pretty much always took Sabbaths. I know how to rest. I know how to enjoy. Because I did start the church from a different place, than a lot of my peers. My primary egoic project of like, look at me, I'm special. When I was young, playing sports and doing music, it wasn't primarily worked out through ministry. So I had a different starting point than other people who get into ministry young. So I think now specifically being around hospice care, I'm like, death is a transition. And the whole mystical, the whole perennial tradition with death is like, there's a famous saying I quote in one of my books on a monastery in Latin. It's in Latin, but it basically says, if you die before you die, then when you die, you don't die. And it's the 10,000 micro deaths of death of expectations, death of the way you thought your life was supposed to be, death of this thing, death of that, letting go of this, all these things. These are all forms of death in our life. 10,000 deaths in your life, if you handle them well, prepares you even more so for the big biological death at the end, because the mystery and uncertainty of death is no longer as scary to you as it once was, because you've been carried through so many. I forget where in my first book, I don't even remember what I wrote, but it's like the mystic, like laughs through. It's basically the mystic discovers that the funeral is actually an entrance to the party. And I don't mean your biological death. I mean like every death. I thought my church was supposed to be here by year 4 and we're not. And I'm kind of feeling bad. And I feel like I'm disappointing people. So now I can work myself to burnout to try to make it become what I thought it was supposed to be. Or I can let go of and die to where I thought it was supposed to be in order to embrace what it is to let it live again. Ooh, now I'm not so stressed. The more you trust that. And so to me, I say that because I think my personal journey with death and letting go allows me to be very present to actual people who are close to the edge and be like, yeah, this is another transition. And the uncertainty, I think you'll discover, is friendlier than you think. That's what I think.
It's strange, though, that my understanding of the gospel, limited though it may be, but my understanding is it was always an invitation to death. I mean, the whole thing is, predicated on dying to self. It's the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ has now become our death, burial, resurrection. It's the denying of self. It's all this. The Christian life, if it's lived well, should be a life of 1,000 deaths. And what you say is especially poignant, I think, for those of us who planted churches and attempted things, because it took me a while to name what I was feeling when those things failed. Because it was, at first, it was, on a superficial level, it's like, well, I failed. And then later on, deeper looking, there was a grieving of that ideal of whatever dream that was, or whatever goal you had that I missed. It didn't just fail. It also, what this thing had, what I had envisioned for it, died. And if we don't know how to grieve those things, and if we don't know how to recognize that that's what we're dealing with, I think that's why we, like you just, I think so eloquently put it, is that's why we burn out. Because I go back and try to resurrect things that, man, they're dead. Stop trying to breathe life back into something that is long dead when you should be moving on to the next thing and learn. And that's because that to me is one of the biggest issues with the modern Western evangelical churches. We don't do any of that well. We don't deal with discomfort well. We don't lament well. We don't. That's why there's my mom was a part of a thing called Grief Share for years, because people don't know how to mourn. They're never taught how to do that, and they're left with these big gaping wounds that no one's ever told them how to address and how to heal.
Well, that's why my second book, The Joy of Letting Go, is literally everything we're talking about. It's me. Letting go is not one thing we do. Letting go is that which holds together everything we do.
Yeah.
Anybody who's angry, the thing about in our world, angry, frustrated, this or that, you listen long enough and you can get to the point, you're like, there's something really hard you have to accept about where things are. Which means there's something really painful you have to let go of about the way things aren't. This involves death and it involves grief. and you feel it in your body when you grieve things. It's not a head trip. It's an embodied thing that's very painful that most people spend their whole lives trying to avoid. If you get good at that, like that's to me, like the cross is many things. In the Cosmic Christ, I say the cross is a divine yes and a divine no. You know, it's a paradox, right? But in the Joy Letting Go book, I said the cross is an icon of acceptance. It's a surplus. It's everything because it's an icon of everything. And so I'm like, the cross is a divine. It's acceptance. It's the great allowing, the allowing for everything to go wrong. And you die to that, and guess what happens? There's resurrection. You know, this whole journey is about trusting death. That's why, like, when my wife and I led our church, when we were 32, we were like the oldest people in the church. And sometimes I'm like, my preaching is not great here because all I'm saying is like, you got to let go and die to things. But when you're 25, you're like, can you just pump me up a little bit to do some shit? Like,
I'm not being inspired.
For me, and I really believe this, most preaching is cheerleading for the ego.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's inspiring it, like, go ego, go ego, go. I've never said that, but it's hilarious. But I'm like, you know, you need that sometimes, you know, inspire, encourage, and all that. But that in the second half of life, the ego doesn't need encouragement, it needs a eulogy. And we need people to guide us through that. That's what we're talking about right now, you know?
No, I completely agree. We are getting close to the end of our time. I don't want to cut it short, but I also want to be mindful of your time as well, sir. So
I do have it in 40 minutes, so it's pretty important.
Well, we got to make sure, yeah, for sure.
Do you have a haircut today too, Nat? Is that you going today?
I have an appointment with the razor in the other room, and it's going to take me all of 45 seconds to create this. I can help you with that. I can free up some time in your life, some money, but I appreciate all this because this is the thing that I'll speak for myself, but I bet John and Bethany resonate somewhat. But the thing that I struggle with is exactly what you talked about earlier, which is letting go of certain things while hanging on to important things and figuring out which is which, you know, and for lack of a better cliche, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So while I have become cynical somewhat to the institution of church, I am not hostile to the ideal of church. You know, I recognize fully the need for connection, but I am also mindful it doesn't have to take place the way it's always taken place. And it doesn't have to take place I don't think it takes place in its best iteration inside those structures that we've built that then have to be perpetuated. You've planted churches. You understand the machinery that goes into making that work and be successful and being able to do it more than 5 or 10 years. It takes every ounce of effort sometimes that you have. And then sometimes you still close and go, fuck it, didn't work. But that's the best part of it for me is that figuring out how to move forward, holding on to the best concepts, holding on to the best ideals while letting go of the things that are life draining, those things that are toxic, those things that are harmful to, you know, the people that we're talking about, especially. I think the church institutionally has a lot of blood on its hands with regards to marginalized communities and the way that it's approached a lot of this through colonization type work. I don't know. That's the beauty of a book like yours. I think that's the utility of a book like yours is helping us to walk through that. John, Bethany, anything I missed in that?
I think it's really real. Like I think we're designed for community, and it's hard to find communal spaces that feel safe and that feel like they are pushing us into spaces of like recognizing the capacity we have towards loving people that are outside our comfortable and familiar spaces of knowing, like recognizing our own white supremacy and our own white privilege. I will say that we get a lot of books through this podcast, different authors, and we've read some really good books. And yours came to us through like a PDF, and I literally just bought your book today because I want a hard copy. It is such a good book, and I want to read it again and again. It impacted me, and I know that for a lot of our listeners, it will impact them as well. So I hope that our listeners will go out and buy your book because it's it's one I want to read over and over again. Yeah.
No, it's cool. I appreciate that a lot. I think I was there's a park, it's the last thing I'll say. There's a park across the street from us, like near the water, and I take a million walks there. And it was like kind of like pandemic time, 2021-ish, I kind of forget. But I just said, you know what? Like, I want to write a book about Jesus. Because I was like, a part of this is making sense of, like, and I say this in the book, like, why I'm still a Christian. Right? I'm like, after my initial awakening in Christ, 20 years ago, and the steady flow of evolution and transformation, I'm like, why is it so natural and comfortable for me to call myself a Christian? Like, I've read all the books that make someone question their beliefs about Jesus and their participation in the Christian tradition at all. I've wrestled with the radical contingency of everything, of like, nothing just is the way it is. Everything has an origin point, and kind of the destabilizing thing that comes from realizing that in our lives. But I'm still just as committed to this path as I was, when I was on fire for Jesus at, 20 or whatever. And through that, I think one of the biggest discoveries, I think I already knew, but writing this made me really see it with clarity, is like, oh, you can be fully committed to the way of Jesus regardless of your religious beliefs. That's a big thing for me, because every chapter, and I didn't even plan this, but every chapter I have, like, love and liberation, experience and embodiment, safe and dangerous, compassion within to ourselves and compassion to others, or whatever it is. I'm like, oh, you can experience and practice the fullness of every one of these regardless of your abstract religious or dogmatic beliefs. There's no religious dogma does not disqualify you from receiving love at all, period. And dogma does not qualify or disqualify you from practicing liberation in this world, or experiencing God, or embodying. Like, to me, I'm like, that's a part of the hopeful part of, like, when people are letting go of beliefs and they're not a Christian, I'm like, dude, I stopped thinking that so long ago, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything about this experiential knowing of God and my commitment to this path. What is believing this abstract, isolated idea that came from this 4th century creed have to do with me being present to my neighbor and receiving love? Who gives a shit, dude? Like, if it's helpful, great. Like, beliefs for me are valuable insofar as they lead to embodiment. And if they don't mean anything to me, And so to me, I'm like, in this understanding of the Christ, the cosmic Christ and the concrete Jesus, I don't know if I believe in this. It doesn't matter to know this in its fullness. I don't know if I believe X, Y, and Z. It doesn't matter to fully belong here and be embraced by us, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that was my big discovery. It's like, oh, actually your abstract dogmatic beliefs aren't as important as we've made them out to be when it comes to the fullness of life in Christ. There's a lot of possibilities now, for us to do this together and to be together and to know God and to be committed to love. So I found that to be kind of hilarious, to be honest, along the way. I'm like, oh yeah. And so I never preached about doctrine once in about 10 years, or dogma or beliefs. And I never even thought to do it. Because I'm like, this is a wisdom tradition. This is an experiential thing. This is a practice. It's all a path. I never thought to talk about, why would I tell a 22-year-old about the historical doctrine of the Trinity? For me, I'm like, what does that mean? I mean, sure, you can connect it with realities in your life, sure. But I'm like, I just never thought about those things. So, yeah.
I'm the same. I got to a point where I got really into that stuff for a little while. And that was part of my deconstruction, was getting really into in order to dismantle certain toxic theologies, you have to dig into them. So for a little while, that's all I did was I read books about atonement theories. Let's talk about the realities of heaven and hell. Let's talk about all this stuff. And then it got to a point where I'm like, I no longer care about any of this stuff unless and until it leads someplace. And so, and the other part of that is it just always ended up, in very fruitless arguments with people over, fine points of theology where people love to people love to be experts and know their stuff, and they want to,
why would we argue about atonement passively aggressively like evangelicals love to do in reality? You just need to forgive your dad, bro.
Let's get to the heart of it and stop. Yeah, I don't need to know about, this has its roots in Augustinian theology. I don't care. Like you say, you just need to, like, forgive your dad, or learn how to love yourself or whatever the case may be. So that to me is the beauty of all this. And I appreciate you putting it into words, man. Thanks for joining us all the way,
so good.
all the way from your terrible hovel there in Honolulu. We're also. I'm sitting here in this. It's 100. I think it's like 100 degrees today, man, and it's just brown and it's Texas, man. Of course, John and Bethany are up there in the beautiful North Coast, so
it's gorgeous today. It's insane.
No, I appreciate you guys.
No,
good.
Thank you. All right, we will. We'll link to everything in the show notes to make sure people have an opportunity and access to go buy the book or 4 or 5 or 10 copies. Share with your friends, all that good stuff, and point them towards your podcast and everything.
Yeah.
Just keep doing what you do, man. Appreciate it. Hopefully it's not 2 more years before we see you again, but stay in touch.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.